Hello YouTube, this is Robert Ness 816 and I may or may not be attacked by a cat during this video, so if it happens I'm just gonna go with it. Anyway, I'm coming at you with another video because I got a defective Parker 87R and I made a video about that one and I took it down because Super Safety Razors was really quick to respond to my inquiry on that razor, because this one had the original one had a issue where the blade would sit crooked in the razor. So what would happen is I would get a lot of blade overhang on this side and on this side, or however it was manufactured, and that would result in a very terrible shave. Basically, you would get all nicks and cuts where the blade was overhanging, and that's never a good thing. So anyway, they replaced it, no questions asked, really. So why am I making this video? So this video is going to be more or less about what to look for if you buy a used vintage razor off of eBay or a new production razor off of eBay, because they both have their separate issues. They're unique issues onto each in their own there. So the vintage stuff, you only have issues with it if the razor was dropped. The new stuff you have manufacturing problems with. So Gillette back in the day had really zero issues with manufacturing problems, except in the, from my knowledge, to was it the 1900s, I think, or even the early 20s, when they had their open comb brass razors where the handles would crack. But these razors here, however, made in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, pretty much they're perfect as far as manufacturing goes. And then you have these Hagen razors, which are made by, I think, Wishi. These razors are actually made really well, believe it or not. I've never had an issue with these. I have two of these actually. Never a problem with them. I've had two Parkers, and ironically, both of them had the exact same issue where the blade would sit crooked in the head. However, both of them were replaced. And I've had issues with the vintage Gillettes where the razors would be dropped, and if you would look at the razor up close, you would actually see that the head would be bent physically, because these razors are made out of all brass. And this is the cat destroying stuff. I told you. Anyway, so what you want to do with these razors is basically check for alignment issues with the vintage ones. So look at it head on like this one, and you see how the head is perfectly symmetrical on both sides. And if that's the case, then you have a good razor. Also, you want to check and see if these end caps are missing. So sometimes they just fall off, they're just soldered on. So sometimes they might just fall off. Other times, if the razor is dropped, they will pop off. And at that point, you will actually see some type of misalignment in the razor. So I'll put a blade in this one. The other thing too is you want to make sure that the doors on these razors open and close more or less evenly. So you see how this one kind of opens and closes pretty much evenly there. That is a sign of excellent build quality. And this one is from 1956, by the way, so getting build quality like that is something that actually can't be duplicated today by any manufacturer, unfortunately. No matter how much money you spend, you cannot get build quality like that. So I'm going to put in a blade, snug it down, and you will look at the blade gap, which is right here. So memorize how perfect the blade gap is on this razor. So I'm going to try and let's see if I can get in closer there. I'll try to lock the focus. There you go. So now you can see how perfect the blade gap is here. There's no bends in the blade, there's no nothing. It's just perfect how it should be. And keep in mind that this razor is, what, 60 years old now or something like that? And you have basically perfection. So that's why these razors are pretty sought after, because they possess something that modern razors just don't have, which is basically perfect build quality and a perfect manufacturing process, which Gillette perfected. Uh, these were made by probably the hundreds of thousands back in the day, and these sold for, I believe, 70 cents. So, you know, really you can't complain. There's a little bit of plating missing here on the bottom, you can see, and then on the top, you know, there's a little bit of pitting, I guess you would call it, or peppering, I guess is the correct term, but I mean, it doesn't affect the razor at all because it's brass. It's merely a cosmetic issue with it. So, I mean, you know, really, these are great razors. You can get them for anywhere from, you know, $5 to like figure $30 or so. But excellent shaving razors, slightly aggressive, but yeah. And then we have the 73 flare tip, and this is just a middle of the road razor designed for everyday use. So this one, pretty much perfect, very little use on it. These have aluminum handles on the newer flare tips. The older ones had brass handles. So the red tip has a thicker brass handle, so it's got a little more weight to it. But again, 1973, so Gillette improved the manufacturing process by getting rid of those soldered on end caps, and now they have these crimp on end caps that incorporate the hinges. So the T-bar assembly is now simplified, as is the end cap. So take note of how this is manufactured, because this is going to basically be copied by the other two companies. See how it's crimped on right there? And this is the head design that the other two companies basically follow or copy. So and I'll put a blade in here and I'll show you guys how the blades look. Zoom in even. And there you can see, once again, it is perfect. So that's why these razors are so popular, because Gillette had a perfect manufacturing process. I keep saying that word, but it's true. So now we'll move on to the new stuff. So Parker gets credit because they make an entirely brass razor, which is very expensive to do today. So this razor sells for like 30 bucks, I believe. It is made from stamped components. And there's the cat again. He wants to go in the closet. But anyway, so this has completely stamped parts, and if I open it up here, you can see how it's kind of, I guess, welded inside of there. I think this is cast right here, or maybe stamped, because it's a solid piece, whereas on the older razors it's folded over. And what Gillette did was they put a pop rivet through the bottom of this T-bar, whereas Parker seems to put like a little tack weld, I guess, here, or solder it or something. So not as good, but you can see on the bottom here they copied Gillette's newer head design, where they crimped on the end caps. And this one right here, it appears like they soldered it even. Did they do that on the other side? Nope. So either that's solder or that's just some chrome plating. It looks like it was soldered. Supposedly these are handmade or whatever too, but I guess I could believe that with how cheap the labor is in India. So we'll open up the doors. Pretty even. Not terrible. And then we'll put a blade in here too, and I'll show you what the blade exposure looks like. So looking at it from the top, this time it's more or less perfect. You can see how there's a little bit of a dip right here. That doesn't mean that there's more overhang or whatever that you want to look at the comb for. But if you look at the blade in general, it sits in the head pretty much perfectly for the most part, at least from what I can see. So we'll zoom in and try to lock the focus. There we go. This razor's a little bit taller, so I had to adjust for that. Alright, so you can see the doors on this razor when you look at it up close, how this one's got a little bit of a rise in it over here and how it's kind of curving the blade over. So not anywhere near as perfect as Gillette. This one also has a larger blade gap, so this is a more aggressive razor, even more aggressive than the red tip. And then we'll look at the other side where you have pretty much the same thing, whereas on the edges you have the blade being curved a little bit. So definitely not as, pretty hairy too, I got some crap on it there, but definitely not as clean as what the Gillette products were. And then last but not least, the Hagen razor. So this one gets a lot of credit because it is incredibly well made for the price. You get a very nice brass handle with very deep grooves in here, so very grippy handle. A very nicely made TTO mechanism, so you have, just like the Gillette, you have a folded over T-bar, so you can see how that's made, and the crimps on this one are fairly decent. I would say better than the Parker's. And if we grab the 73 flare tip and compare it side by side, you can see what they did. So the flare tip has thicker end caps than the Hagen razor does, and Hagen or Weishi basically just copied Gillette's head design. And then if we look at the head gap here, I would bet that they are, so they're a little bit different actually. I think the Gillette has a little bit more of a blade gap than the Hagen does, and that makes sense too because the Gillette does give a closer shave. But side by side though, they're extremely similar. So I'll put a blade in the Hagen. And here you can see the T-bars folded over just like the Gillette is. Folded over, and I'm not sure how that's affixed to it. It might just be with a pop rivet like the Gillette had. But with this one, I believe these doors are stamped, and I think this base plate might just be cast. I'm not really too sure. But I'm going with stamped doors here, and a obviously stamped or folded over T-bar just like the Gillette was. You can kind of see how similar they are. Folded over T-bar. The doors on here are stamped, obviously. So very, very similar in construction actually. So the Hagen is actually really nicely made. So put a blade into the Hagen. Close it down. We'll check how the doors open and close too. Might as well do that. Fairly even. So then we'll close the doors and we'll check the blade exposure, what it looks like up close. There we go. So, try to focus again. Okay, so you can see on the edges once again how the blades are kind of pushed down, or blade rather. So the blade is a little bit bowed in its shape. It's not perfectly flat. So you can see how the ends again, they get pushed down a little bit. And on this side, more or less the same thing. There's a little bit of a bowing effect going on there. So I'll just put the blade back into the vintage Gillette again, just to show you. 73 flare tip, and you can see, perfect. No bowing, no nothing. So that's why vintage is better. But anyways, when you do buy a TTO razor, always check to make sure that the head is perfectly symmetrical. Because if it's uneven in any way, like if you have uneven blade exposure at all, that will lead to a very bad shave for you. You get a lot of irritation, a lot of nicks and cuts. I'm telling you this because I've been there and I've done that. So, alright guys, thanks for watching. Have a nice day.